I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jen West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadowcasting. Hey Jen, how are you?
I am outstanding because I am at the beach on vacation.
Oh, I am so jealous. I bet you're enjoying that sun and ocean.
Oh, I am. It is beautiful here on the beach. The waves, the big rollers, they're not the rough ones, they're the ones that are pretty and go.
Ah, sounds like a great time. So, I was thinking a couple weeks ago, we did a podcast on a quote by Marcus Aurelius, where we talked about the ability for us to rise from failure. And in doing that, that's a way of celebrating our humanity, because humanity is inherent with making mistakes. And part of humanity is also learning to overcome that, learning from our failures. And I feel like in our podcast on the quote, we really hit on the celebrating our humanity part, which I think was really important. And I thought it would be cool to really do a deep dive into failure. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea because I remember doing that and wanting to talk more about the failure part. So yeah, let's dive in. Let's make failure something fun.
Yeah. And I want to kick it off the bat right there, because I feel like when our audience finds this podcast, they might be like, oh, do I really want to listen about failure? So let's just address the elephant in the room, in that there is a mindset that is important when we're working with and dealing with failure. And I mean, you and I'm looking at us on the cameras right now. Our audience can't see us, but we're smiling. Failure is not serious. It's not this deeply entrenched judgmental process that you and I have to go through. And I really want to emphasize that for our audience. As you're listening today, listen to how Jen and I talk about failure, not necessarily what we're saying, because that's important too, but there's a different energy here as we're going to go on with this conversation about failure. And I feel like that's an important thing for people to learn as they deal with failure in their own life.
For sure. What I'm thinking about right now is the fact that we talked about magic and totally turned magic into this heavy thing. It's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's work. And now we're saying, hey, audience, you are going to love failure by the end.
Oh my gosh.
Our evil, evil people, Dave.
I can't wait. So we're going to jump ahead. Leave a comment if we changed your mindset on failure. Are you going to love failure by the end of the podcast? Let's find out.
Yeah, hold space for it. Or is it like, no, you guys failed?
Yeah. Or did we fail? Did we have a learning opportunity?
Yeah.
So let's talk about failure. Failure can show up in a few different ways. Obviously, the most apparent one is failures when things don't work on the first go. We are learning a new skill. We're learning a new language. We're learning the guitar. We're learning a new job responsibility at work. We're learning how to be new parents. We're learning how to be in a new relationship. Anytime there's a first crack at something, generally we're not good at it. And so we fail. And I think failure is, in that sense, we judge it because we have an expectation. We think if we're going to learn that language, that we're just going to be able to communicate fluently like somebody that was natively born in a different language. And it just doesn't work that way. And so we set ourselves up for failure with these differing expectations.
And if you're one of those people who are good at things on the first try, we hate you. Go away. Don't listen to our podcast. You're not fair. You make it harder for the rest of us.
Well, and what's really interesting with the people that can do it right on the first try, even in chiro school when I was going through it, sometimes when we were practicing new techniques, like on how to adjust patients, there would be some people that could get it on the first try, but not the second, not the third, or the fourth, or the fifth. It's kind of like that beginner's luck. Failure is inherent in any learning process. It's just when it shows up for you. For a lot of us, jokes aside, it does come up with the first few tries. There are those lucky few that are just inherently talented and can get it on the first try. And maybe this podcast isn't for them then.
Yeah. Although I will say I prefer when I'm not good at it to start and I get better, because I've had those instances where I'm really, really good at it the first time I do it. And then after that, I can't get it back. And that's painful. That one's hard when it's like, I did it. Oh, it was so easy. And now I can't make myself do it again.
So let's talk about failure, because failure is a very ethereal topic. It's a very broad scoped concept. Jen, I was hoping you could help me, for our audience, like break it down a bit. Like how do you define failure, if you would add a definition to what I kind of already discussed? And how do you break down failure? What comes up for you when you failed at something?
Well, I have to say, for the majority of my life, I thought if I put an expectation out into the world, or a plan or anything like that, if it didn't go to those steps, or if my outcome didn't become the solution that I had envisioned in my brain, that was failure. And if I had a project I was doing, if the steps that I was taking, if each one wasn't easy and successful at each step, that was failure. And it was really hard for something even as simple as calling to find somebody to fix my sprinkler system. If the first person I called couldn't fix my sprinkler system within the time frame I had imagined, that was failure. And I think quite a few people have a mindset that things need to work out the first time, that stuff needs to go how we imagine it going. And for me, that's the energy of failure I've come up with. What about you, Dave? Like, what was it for you?
I really liked what you added there at the end. What I was thinking about is the first time. And on this podcast, I think I've shared a few times about being in college, and the example that always comes to mind is bowling, because I feel like the moment you and I sort of bonded on this journey together. I went bowling as a kid, went bowling as a young adult. And then when I met my college friends, they were just so much better than me at bowling. Could not bowl over 100 to save my life. And that was just failure every time. I mean, it was competitiveness, but it was failure. And it was because I had an opportunity. When I am presented with something I struggle with, and I am in the struggle, in that seriousness of it, and I have the expectation of an outcome, I'm going to win this game, I'm going to get a higher score, I'm going to do better, I start to create this very rigid outlook of what I'm expecting. And the more rigid the outlook, the more chances there are of failure.
That's truth right there. I think that is the definition we need. I kind of muddled around it. But yeah, when we have a very rigid structure of how something should look and it deviates at all, failure. And depending on your personality, then that's going to be more extreme or less extreme. And it may be in certain areas as well. When I'm moving or I'm riding the horses and I'm in that relationship, things are not going to work as I plan. I know they won't. So I'm really open to things not working, the horse not doing what I want, the day not going, the weather not being right. I'm cool with that. Yeah. But in certain other things, like dealing with other humans or projects or even technology, sometimes I expect things to work. And when they don't, it feels like failure, and I don't want to try more. And that took a long time for me to get through, where I was like, well, I failed, so fuck it.
It's interesting because for you, you're willing to fail with horses, but I guarantee if I were to watch you riding a horse, failure is not the word that would come to mind. That would not be the description I would use. And similarly, when I'm in the sheets, and Excel sheets, Google Sheets, whatever, using formulas, I have the same mindset. I go, I know the first time I put this formula in, I'm going to get a reference error, a value error, something's not going to go right. And I don't judge that. My rigid expectations of the outcomes are much wider. I have a much more open acceptance of what's going to happen. And I have been told by my colleagues and coworkers, and even you, that when they watch me do that stuff, they don't see the failure that I'm anticipating, right? They see, oh, Dave didn't get it right, but they know he's going to get it right the second or the third time. And I do, because I don't judge the failure of the first wrong error. I go, okay, I was expecting this. Now, where do I tweak it? How do I tweak it? And I think this kind of rolls into the next topic, or the next part of this, which is we've kind of addressed that failure is this rigid expectation that limits us. And what's the opposite of that? So then when things don't go our way, because things will inevitably not go our way. Failure is, as I said earlier, inherent in our humanity. I think I said that 2 weeks ago in our podcast. And I don't mean that in a pessimistic way. I mean that as it is another tool that, if you are willing to separate and create space with, is an opportunity for you to grow as a human being. It's just that we get so judgmental with it. We get so serious. We get so heavy. And so we pile our mind, we stress our mind with all these expectations and outcomes that we're expecting to happen. And when they don't, our mind isn't starting to shift and pivot and go, okay, how can I change this? What's the opportunity here? How can I learn from this? It's still in the past going, okay, I messed up. I'm a failure. I'm not going to be good at this. And we continue to almost self-feed that story.
Yeah, I want to jump in here and really play with this idea for our audience, because Dave's really good at spreadsheets. Although I don't know about you, audience, when he said he was good in the sheets. We'll just let that linger there. We won't ask him anymore about that. But when he's in a spreadsheet and he knows mistakes are going to happen, that things are not going to work out right. And so it's calculated for. There's this expectation that something's not going to be written in there correctly, and it's not a big deal. You just fix it when it shows up. And that has something to say about experience. We've done it. We know things don't work. It's okay. We also have ideas on how to fix those things. We have all kinds of solutions on where to look and what to look for and how to quickly absorb that thing that didn't work and make it work. We actually hope those things come out because they're easy to fix. You just see it. And that's how it is with me and the horses. The horse does something, I can counter it. I have a billion tools in the box that I can check and reference. And when we're beginners or we're doing something outside our comfort zone, those failures feel epic because we don't have a toolbox to reference. And I think that's another play in why failure hurts. And the only fix for when it hurts is to do it a lot more, to find the toolbox or get with somebody who does know, who has a big toolbox. And then they can help you build that toolbox much more quickly.
I'm going to pivot the conversation here. I'm coming to the mindset that I think it's important that we look at the message of failure, in that it is a learned behavior that failure is wrong, bad, or that we judge it. And I want to believe that that comes from the messages we received in childhood. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone told you you were wrong because you failed, but we internalized at some point that we were less than, incorrect, that we needed to judge ourselves when we failed, whether that was from a spouse, parent. Actually, I guess if we were a kid, we didn't have spouses. So whether that's from a parent, friend, relative,
mentor, teacher.
Yeah, there was someone in our very early life that told us failure is wrong, and we internalized that. And we probably didn't receive it just once. We probably received it from multiple sources of people that we trusted in a younger age. And so we learned from their behavior. We saw them judge themselves because they failed. We saw them judge us because we failed. And so we internalize that and kind of keep that cycle going. And what Jen and I are getting at is we've got to break the cycle. And that's hard. That's work. And it doesn't have to be unenjoyable. You can make it fun. For example, one of the ways that I deal with failures is I have this saying, win or learn, never lose. And for me, it's this rewriting of the message, because when I grew up, I internalized a message of you have to succeed. You have to be right. You have to. There was a very rigid mindset that I internalized growing up. And you were either right or wrong. You were either success or you were a failure. It was this dualistic, serious approach to things. And as I've grown and kind of worked and done my shadow casting of my own life and celebrating my own humanity, I've learned that failure is inherent. And so to create a dichotomy of win or lose is kind of like saying that I'm going to be happy or sad. Yes, it's both. I can have either emotion. I can have either outcome happen at any point. I don't usually judge when I'm happy. I don't usually judge when I win, but I do judge if I'm really depressed or if I'm failing at something. And when you look at how you handle those two things, you realize that the choice is the same in both. We just choose differently because we haven't seen it done differently. When we see happiness, when we see success, we see everyone else celebrating that and getting into play and joyful, and there's lightness. And so we go, okay, I can only be in that mindset when I'm successful and happy. But that's not true. You can have that same mindset when you're failing, when things aren't working out well. In fact, I'd almost argue it's pivotal that you have that mindset when you're in failure.
I agree 100%. Win or learn. I mean, that's a huge lesson. I love that that kind of became your mantra. I'm either winning or I'm learning something that, like with working with spreadsheets, you now have a tool when it doesn't work again.
Yeah, exactly. It's the growth mindset. I think we're avoiding that word a bit because that could probably be a podcast in and of itself. But it's the idea that you can either judge or you can learn. And so when you decide to learn, you're just building a toolbox for how to handle things in the future. And you can refine those tools as well. You can get fancier tools. There's kits out there, like toolkits out there that have 108 different screwdriver heads. I mean, it's not like you just need a Phillips screwdriver head or a flathead. Those are the two that people mostly go to, but there's like hundreds of different types that you need. And that's kind of what you're building as you develop this growth mindset, this ability to learn from failure is you develop more ways to handle a problem. You see a screw and you're like, oh, I could use one of two ways to handle that. Or I could go to my toolbox that I'm growing out of the 108 other ways to handle it and see if there's something a little bit more specific, maybe easier or a better time of getting that screw out of the wall or whatever you're trying to do.
What we're giving our listeners right now are high level tools, like the very basic tools to start shifting the mindset. The first one, curiosity. You got to get curious about these things that really bum you out when you're not good at them and that you call failures. So first you got to see it. So curiosity. Then another tool that's a layer down from that. How do I deal with it? Well, you got Dave's first method here, which is win or learn. If you could put that in your head before you even start, that's going to shift things magically. You're going to start looking at the world and being, that didn't quite work. I didn't win, but I learned a lot. How do I implement that into the future? And then a tool that I took on, since I had that mindset that if it didn't work the first time, why do anything else with it? I failed. I'm done. You know, who cares? I'm just going to take it out of my mind. It's over. So I put in my mind when I do something that makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to fail 10 times. Like things are not going to work. All these things are going to go wrong 10 times. And if it takes 10 times, well, that was my expectation. And expectations are normally what get us in trouble. So if I expect to not do well the first 10 times, then, well, that's fine if it takes 10 times. If it takes a little more, well, then we have a lot more to learn in that skill. If it takes any less than that, super successful. I mean, that's a celebration worth having. It's like, it only took me 2 tries and then I had it. And you feel so much better about it because you were expecting 10 fails. And if you do it right the first time, wow, good day. But if you do that same thing again, put the 10 times back. Always have a certain number of failures so that you have something to exceed. It's not it worked or it didn't.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to add to that or contextualize that a bit. The other thing too is that Jen, because I can hear the audience going, well, if you expect that it's going to take 10 fails, then you're going to fail 10 times. And that's not what she's saying either. And I just want to put an asterisk or a footnote on that, because what she's saying is that we're not expecting to get it right in the first try. The expectation is that it's going to take multiple tries and multiple iterations. And she's not judging herself whether she gets it in 1 try, 10 tries, or 20 tries. What she's saying is that she recognizes that it's going to take more than a singular effort to accomplish what she's looking at. And if it doesn't, all the better. But she's not setting herself up in that way for a failure. And so I just thought I'd like pivot that mindset, because that can be a failure mindset too. Oh, if I don't get this in 5 tries, I'm done. That's not what she's saying. If she says she's going to fail 10 times and still doesn't get it, guess what? She's on to fail 11. She keeps going.
Yeah, it's just a way to set the brain that it doesn't have to happen the very first time. And okay, so I have these two ideas that I'm going to break out here: expectation versus an intention. So
Yes.
when I say expectation, that's that very serious, tight, this is exactly my plan is going to work. I expect this to happen, and then I expect this to happen, and then I expect this thing to happen, and they will happen in that order, and they will work. And that leads to things feeling really icky when they go sideways. But if you go, I have the intention of doing this and this and this and this, but if one of them fumbles, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make it work. So I would like it to work the first time. But if it doesn't work the first time, it's okay because it's just an intention and I can remodel. It's kind of like, let's say you're going to see a football game or a sporting event or a play or whatever you like, a movie, and you have an expectation that you're going to go to the city, you're going to find parking, traffic's going to you've set your time on how long it's going to take to get there, and an expectation would be everything flows exactly as it's meant to. Nobody gets in your way. There isn't a car accident. The play starts on time. There's perfect parking. And if any of that doesn't work, then you're just flustered and mad, and it's hard. But if you go in going, well, the play starts at this time and there's parking around this area and it's a 45-minute drive if everything goes perfectly, I think I'll leave an hour, give myself 15 minutes because there might be a car accident. I may have to take a different road. There might be hard to find parking. And then I got to walk to wherever the venue is. If you can put in those intentions that leave space for things not going perfectly, it helps a lot. And so that's kind of what I mean about multiple failures. And you have to find the words that work for you. Me failed 10 times at least helped me move, whatever gets me started, whatever gets me out of that stuck feeling of fear and overwhelm. And that did it for me. It's like, it's not going to work. It's okay. We're going to go try.
Yeah. Well, I think what's coming to mind for me is you brought up there at the end that like stuckness feeling. And I'd encourage, if you're really listening again to this podcast, like I said at the beginning, to listen to the energy behind what we're sharing this time rather than the words itself. I'd encourage you to go back and re-listen to what Jen just shared, because there's this moment where you can feel that seriousness, that stuckness. And that's what we're getting at. If everyone has listened to our podcast, and we'll make sure to tag this in our show notes, there's a podcast that we already did on play, and we touched on this concept of seriousness versus sincerity. And I think that's just another way of looking at the same topic of intention versus expectation, or win versus failure. There's this idea of sincerity and seriousness. And you can see that you're starting to build this relationship with yourself where we're trying to take ourselves, including Jen and I, out of this very stuck mindset of success and winning and seriousness and all these heavy conditional messages that we've received. And we're trying to say, okay, we can see where these things are important. And if we pivot how we focus on them and how we approach them in our own heads, not necessarily even our actions. Jen isn't saying that she's not going to go to that concert. She's just saying that she can either try to meticulously plan down to the minute how she's getting there, or she can say, these are the general things I need to plan for, and this is how much time I need, and what comes. And you can see, and if you can really listen and feel into that, when you get into intention and sincerity, there's this, it's not that there isn't duality, it's just that it's progressive. There's this opportunity for things to change and pivot. And you, instead of creating this rigid structure against which you are either succeeding or failing, you create this progressive landscape almost where it's open and there's opportunities for things to come into your life. And that's where the magic happens. Going back to that podcast we mentioned, the magic happens when you give yourself the opportunity to receive life and you're not living in this rigid expectation of success and failure. And sometimes those can be the biggest successes of all that even outweigh the success you were anticipating.
Yeah, most definitely. I was just thinking about the Stoic philosophy and how they deal with failure. They plan for it. And it's a very interesting concept that's hard for us to take in this day and age because most of us catastrophize the future. It's the reason for anxiety. But the Stoics did it a little bit differently. They would look at what could happen and they would look at things that could go wrong in that scenario and come up with solution to it beforehand. So they had tools in the toolbox to get around it. Like if you are driving to a concert and it's 45 minutes away, there could be a car accident, there could be traffic. Well, the solution for that is either leave earlier and just plan to be in traffic, or see if there are other routes to the venue that might be a little slower, but would be faster if there was traffic. And it's the premeditated death. I forgot the name that they use but they call it negative visualization. But it's not anxiety. It's not all the things that could go wrong and then just worrying about them. It's coming up with worst case scenarios so that you can deal with them. And you could do that if you're a speaker and you're like, okay, I'm going to get on stage. Oh, all the sound goes out. If you know that, you might already have a solution for how to handle it. And so that's what it's for. But if catastrophizing is your thing, you may not want to use that one. It doesn't give you more anxiety.
Right. So that's actually a great example where it's really contextual, because in that case,
I had trouble digging into this one. It's actually, I just Googled it. It's premeditato malorum.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I was more trying to think of, if someone is anxious and has the anxiety mindset, you're right. Thinking into the future and planning for the future, that's what they already do. Well, it's what their anxiety already does. That might be a different podcast, because there's more going on there than just a judgment of failure. There's this almost dread. And
this is different. This is like mitigating risk instead.
Right.
This isn't like, oh, the whole world's going to explode. There's a different energy. So if you're in anxiety or you're like, that's the last thing I want to do, stay away from it. Just let it kind of sit in there. Like I said, it took me a while to be like, I don't want to think about the things that can go wrong, especially when I was flipping into the mindset of being more positive and more optimistic about the world. But as I sat into this, I realized, wait, this is more optimistic because I'm seeing potential things that could get in my way and I'm getting ready for them. Not ready for them, but making means on tools that I could use. It's like getting into Dave with his spreadsheets or me with my horseback riding. We're just building the tools beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. I was laughing. I'm thinking maybe the slide is the better example then for the people with anxiety, because it's a singular focus and there's an element of fun, which I think anxiety I wouldn't say the antidote to anxiety, but it's a good combat to anxiety when you're leaning more into the fun. So Jen, why don't you share that example?
All right. Thanks for leading me into that. So we go from like doomsday stoicism to Jen's playful rebel of delight.
Because we're shadows, we adapt.
We adapt. Yeah. Watch me adapt. No, so here's my slide metaphor. And I thought of this a long time ago when I was at a park and a playground. And what's the most fun thing you can do at a playground? Run up the slide. I mean, I don't know about you when you were a kid, but that's what we did. You're supposed to go up the little ramp and then slide down the slide, and that's the rule. And I don't know if you live on a playground now where kids are only allowed to, like there's rules.
Oh.
Have you seen those rules where they're like, you're only allowed to hang from the monkey bars, you're only allowed to slide down the slide, and it's like, no, you're supposed to climb across the top of the monkey bars and do weird stuff and play tag. And
well, actually, time out, because that's actually an amazing analogy, Jen. They are putting rules and restrictions on how to play, just like the message we get at kids. There are rules and restrictions on how to succeed and how to fail.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so okay, continue. I just had to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, and it's brilliant. Boom, mind blown, because that's what it is. We have put such a tight rope that we are allowed to follow. So let's go back to our slide. How many of us have run up that slide and not made it? You're gonna fail at running up the slide. Like maybe a bigger kid can do 3 steps and they're at the top, and then you're 6 years old, and so you're like taking 15 steps and you get halfway up and you're like, ah! What happens? You end up on your butt and you get to slide back down. The failure is fun. I mean, I think that's the original goal, was to slide down. That was the original tool. And now we're just upping the ante. We're getting more creative. So now we're like, hey, can we go up, straight up our slide instead of around and climbing the ladder, which was fun too. Climbing the ladder is totally fun. But you run up the slide and then slide back down. So I remember once I got good at it that I would purposely, can I do it in 2 steps so that I could fail and slide back down the slide?
I'm thinking in business, just to bring this into that mindset a little, because I've worked with other managers and leaders and even employees that aren't in a leadership position. And I think that there's an important concept here, stealing the slide analogy, where the managers give the employees the playground, so the monkey bars, the slides. And the problem is that there are many ways that you can play on the playground. But what happens, especially in business, is you start to get into a routine, a pattern, a thought process that is, again, that limiting structure. And so you put the rules up on the playground because that's what's worked. If you go up the ladder and down the slide, you are guaranteed to go up the ladder and down the slide every time because there's no risk with going up the ladder and down the slide. But here's the problem. That's not success either. That is guaranteeing an outcome based on a set rule and structure. And so what we're trying to play with here in the business sense is there are certain things that you have to do. And if there's a more creative way to do it and it gets the job done in the way that it needs, if the end goal is to slide down the slide, the best thing a leader can do is say, as long as you're sliding down the slide at the end of the day, I don't give a crap how you do that. If you jump from the monkey bars onto the slide and slide down, if you climb up the slide and slide down, if you go up the ladder and slide down, there's so many ways that you can slide down the slide. The failure in this case is when we limit ourselves or judge ourselves. When we decide we want to climb up the slide and then slide down, and someone says, no, that's not how we do it here. And you go, great, I failed. That's what we're kind of like starting to tease out and pick around with this, is this idea that at the end of the day, there's many ways that you can go up and down the slide. And if the agreed upon success is sliding down, is getting down the slide, then where the creativity and the sincerity and the willingness to fail comes in is how you're getting down there.
Yeah, and I'd like to put it, before we started this podcast, I was doing a little research. And of course, I come on to Brene Brown because she's written about failure and shame and guilt and all that good stuff and vulnerability. And she says, if you are not willing to be courageous and vulnerable and fail, you're never going to innovate, because innovation means making mistakes, means trying something new that might not work the first time. And it gets boring and rote. If you just keep going up the ladder and down the slide, you get bored. You get bored unless somebody else is like putting their hands out and you have to tag hands. You need to innovate to keep kids happy and fresh and trying something new. They want to build and grow from that. And that's what our core wants too. Our inner child wants something new and fresh that's not going to work. Some of my favorite games, just thinking about that one, now I want to play it, where you have a long slide and you have a whole bunch of kids, and how far away can they reach? And can you reach across and get a hand as you're coming down the slide? And you got to tag them all? And some kids have their hands up, some have them down. That you're not going to get it. And that's part of the fun, because it's like, okay, how do I keep going until I get all the hands?
Yeah. And so I think the point that I want to draw on with these analogies of the playground and talking about how we pivot our mindset with failure, we get to a point where failure is no longer failure. And if you've been kind of listening along through this podcast, you might have gotten that sense that we've almost ejected that word from our vocabulary. In fact, even when I make mistakes, and being the type 1, I feel like I have to share this because of my own internal moral compass. It doesn't mean that you don't admit you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. It just is how you handle it when it comes up. Failure is no longer failure. When you make mistakes, when things come up that aren't ideal, they become learning opportunities now. Now, when things don't go my way, I don't sit and judge myself. I don't go, I'll try again tomorrow. I go, what's the learning? What can I learn from this? What can I glean? How can I improve? Where can I get curious with this? What conversations can I have that maybe was I clear with myself before this mistake or failure or whatever came up? And so for me, failure shifts into this collaborative recalibration, tweaking environment where there's this sense of safety and security almost in the failure. It's almost a little paradoxical because, like Jen was saying, we almost look for failure now because that tells me that I'm going outside my comfort zone, that I'm going into my growth zone, that I'm expanding beyond where I already was. And for me, that's how I grow.
So for our listener audience, did we change your perspective on failure? Do you have a new relationship? Can you start looking at it like a slide and kind of coming up with new games to challenge yourself and each other? Or did we fail? And you're like, I still hate failure and you guys suck. And why did I waste 40 minutes listening to this podcast? You tell us. And if you have any other tools, everybody could use lots of tools. If you have a different tool, share it because it may really help somebody else.
That's right. There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's.
Yes, there is.
Oh.
It's my way or the highway. And you're supposed to eat it like a little squirrel, hoarding its candy and chewing around the edges and then sucking the peanut
butter. No, you eat the center first.
All right.
Okay, so make sure you let us know in the show notes also how you eat a Reese's, and we'll know you got this far in the podcast. But as always, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening.
Until next time.
See ya.